Я хочу вам сказать, что я очень нервоустроен и еще буду. Зачем? Я здоров.
Я человек законопослушный, у меня есть QR-код.
Я не думаю, что какой-нибудь нормальный, разумный человек может считать QR-коды эффективной мерой.
Так уж случилось, что этот год сильно слишком разделил нас. В каждой постели, в целой квартире слишком много разных нас. Послушай, никого не слушай. Это вообще личное дело. Я за. Я просто, может, вы хотите его.
Today we're kind of probably one of the most iconic shoes in the entire world. We've had tons of comments, DMs, and emails asking to do these shoes because there's so much hype behind them and so many unanswered questions about what's really inside a pair of wooden clogs. So let's cut them in half and find out. Now let's go over the shoe information. So the brand is Clog. The style is the Holland Hollow Aspen Toe Low. The color is wood. They weigh 3 pounds each. They retail for $30 and they're made in Holland. Now let's go over the information that we can gather about these shoes before we cut them in half, starting with the upper. So the upper is actually made out of wood and it's a full grain wood, and you can tell that it's aspen because of the way that it is. And the really cool thing about this is it's a single piece of wood that wraps all the way around the vamp to the back of the shoe. And that's really nice because you don't have any overlap or any stitching that can cause any potential fail points or any weak points. Next to the lining, so the lining is made out of wood, and that can be good and bad because wood is so porous, it's going to be really breathable and cool. But if you're planning on wearing these as a winter shoe, you might want to get the straw line version to give you a little bit more insulation. Next to the outsole, so the outsole is wood, and the thing I don't like about this is the grain runs parallel to the length of the shoe instead of running perpendicular. And the good thing about that is you have that lateral strength, so you're not going to actually break these shoes in half. But the problem is you don't have that perpendicular grip. So that if you're going to use these for hiking, they're not going to grip very well. Or if you're in ice or snow, they're not going to grip very well. Next, moving to the insoles, we'll take out the shoe trees here. So the insole is made out of wood, and just like cork and leather, wood is eventually going to compress the shape of your foot, giving you a very specific and personal footprint inside of your shoe. And then onto the midsole and some of the things we don't know. So I don't really know what the midsole is made out of. I'm guessing it's wood, but we won't really know until we get it cut in half. And that's why I like these videos, because there's probably some stuff in here that we didn't expect. I'm curious to see if there's a shank in here and what kind of shank it is. Next to the tongue. So this is a fully gusseted wooden tongue. If you're using these for work, you're not going to have any debris or water or any kind of particles slip in through the tongue and get into your socks unless it's around the heel. Next to the toe. So this is an EU safety certified wood toe, and it's not going to be quite as protective as a steel toe, but it is going to give you a lot more protection than a regular pair of sneakers or a soft toe boot. And the really nice thing about a wood toe is, like, say you're in the back of the shop and you drop a piece of steel on your toe, it's going to give you some protection, but it might split or crack the wood. But the really nice thing is, if you do get a split, you just run a little bead of glue along there, seal that gap up, or if there's a chunk taken out of it, just get a little bit of wood filler, fill that in, and it'll look as good as new. Next to the maintenance of these shoes, so just like a nice pair of leather shoes or boots, you're going to want to use shoe trees, and it's for basically the same reasons as leather, because clogs, because they're made of wood and it's so porous, the humidity in the air can affect how the wood behaves and changes, especially if you're in a climate that the humidity and temperature shifts radically from season to season. You're going to want to put some shoe trees in there to help maintain that shape and prevent it from splitting and shrinking and warping. Then onto the fit, feel, and look. So these are pretty uncomfortable right off the bat until you get your feet broken into them. I definitely wouldn't recommend buying a brand new pair of these, throwing them on and going and doing a 12-hour work day. You'd probably regret it. I actually really like the look of these. They have that classic timeless look that's been around for centuries, and it's hard to beat this silhouette. It's the classic clog silhouette. And the really nice thing about this is if you end up hating this style, this hook, this fisherman hook toe here, a few years from now, all you got to do is put this on your bell sander, round that toe off, and you've got a more modern style clog. Or if you get to the point where kind of where I'm at with these shoes, where you got a lot of dirt, a lot of buildup, and some patina developing, if you want it to look like a brand new pair of clogs, just take some sandpaper, sand off that top layer of dirt and grime, and you've got a brand new looking pair of shoes. So now we've got that all covered. The next thing to do is cut these in half after we talk about our sponsor, Klomps. This video is brought to you by Klomps. Klomps are the sandals that are made from sustainably sourced, reclaimed lumber, naturally tanned vegetable tan leather, and repurposed fasteners. They have all the benefits of regular sandals with the added protection and durability of clogs. And we use them in the shop almost every single day. Everyone in the shop loves them because they balance that comfort, durability, and they look better than almost any other sandal out there. And you can save 20% off your first order of Klomps by using the code ROSEAMBLE at checkout. I'll put a link to their site in the description. Thanks again to Klomps for sponsoring this video. Where would you wear your wood?
Понимаешь, какая ситуация? А вот я так скажу, ты только не обижайся, ладно? Да, то есть надо заниматься делами, понимаешь? А политика это не дело вообще. Просто вообще полностью. Все и точка. Организовывать людей, ты иди тогда в бизнес, устраивайся на предприятие куда-нибудь. Ну, если ты такой, например. Ну, я к примеру говорю. То есть, как бы, да, то есть, ну, вот я тебе и говорю. Да, а там ты будешь никто, как понимаешь, там тебя уволить могут, конкурентов будет много, да, много знать, расти, и ты там очень, да, понимаешь, да, долгий разговор, короче, поймешь. Но так ты зато будешь мужиком, ты себя не потеряешь, будешь, да, понимаешь, и реализуешься, и будет, понимаю, и проживешь свою жизнь очень не зря для рода человеческого, для популяции свободной. Ну да, поймешь. Ну и что, ну скажи, я не прав. У тебя, если будет время погордиться собой, будет, но самое главное, что тебе будет пространство меньше жать, меньше мешать жить, меньше погано тебя будет дать, понимаешь. Так что гордиться собой, не гордиться, фиг его знает. Если политикам вот, можно сесть и гордиться. Там, ну вот да, понимаешь, это все, да. Она все временно. Ты так не думаешь? Ну ладно, не знаю. Я просто так. Да нет там никакого бога, понимаешь? Если ты такой, власть бога, там какой-нибудь чувак на флейте, если кто-то есть, то он вообще похер на всех. Понимаю. Кому не похер, так это если вот это бог есть, значит там, ну типа того. Вот ему уж точно не похер, понимаешь? Это так, я просто. Ну это продолжая вашу историю просто вообще в целом. Я тебе говорю, да, то есть я не смотрю на эту ситуацию как, да, то есть я не смотрю на то, как, ну нельзя этим жить, понимаешь? То есть если тебя предыдущих веков истории не научило, то есть это просто верование, их не существует на самом деле, понимаешь? Если бы они существовали, все бы, да, понимаешь, да. Ты можешь в этом же веровании, в этих же всех верованиях сказано, если тебе надо будет, то есть если бы Бог хотел, он бы знал, что все, да, ты бы просто, вот он, Бог, все, вот он тобой висит, и ты ходишь и живешь. То есть как будто она понимает. Типа того. То есть в этих же, ну то есть поймешь, короче. Презумпция, ну, да, понимаешь. Ну, далеко, да. То есть я тебе говорю, если ты, но они слабаки, они для слабых людей просто, да, то есть это просто специальное вранье, в которое удобно верить, если так угодно, да. Да. Чтобы свою жизнь прожить, не совершая ничего настоящего. Да. Ну, по сути, как бы на нейтралочке. Как. Ну да. Просто ее просто как животное. Да. Ну, впустую. Ну, не страдает зато. Да. Ну, или страдает мужчина, будет как женщина страдать, а женщина будет как мужчина воевать. Делать она будет. то есть действенное, еще, ну, не воевать уж, наверное. Меня это не касается. Меня это не да. Любви, вот любовь, размножение, романтизм, а потом чпонь. Он понял. Да. Ну вот то же самое, нет. Потом дети у кого-то завелись. Ну, надо показать им пример. В чем-то доме они живут и расползаются. Да, за чей-то счет, так скажем. Да. Вот это проклятие, да. Про это ты Губаев не увидишь ничего, да. То есть, ну, поймешь, да. Да. Это не та любовь. От нее ничего не осталось. Ну, психбольной человек что-нибудь увидел, как в стенку. Ромео и Джульетту увидел. То есть это как бы не что-то. Ну, то есть как бы, ну так, чуть-чуть. За своих отработали. Не. Что-то хотел сказать. Ну, это не знаю, да. Нет, что-то не знаю, да. Ну, да. То есть жить намного проще. А то тебе, ну да, то есть политики как бы, там нет никаких дел, там делать ничего не надо. Да, да. Главное себе надо. Ну, все, ну и что? И? Ну да. Они то же самое говорят. Ну, тьма, забвение, плохая, то есть репутация. Популяции ты как бы, ну, сегодня на руках носят, а завтра даже никто не придет. То есть как бы, ну, хрен с тобой, что там придет просто. То есть, ну, ты не нужен популяции вообще, да. Или ты там, ну, как бы, сеешь зло. То есть, как бы, после какой-то фильтрации, все, что ты там оставил, ну, просто ее не оставить, потому что это все за смерть. Все это, ну, как бы, да, то, что ты сделал, оно просто либо понарошку, либо убийственно. Да. То есть не за жизнь. Ну да. Да. Ну верно. Примера мало. Мало. Ну что да. Ну, последовательно. Работать надо, то есть ну ничего даже, если ты политик, военный и видео все вместе одновременно. Бывает скучно. Да. Ну ладно. Да. Ничего уж мог, ну, постепенно. Ну, показатель здесь деньги. От кого, да, то есть, ну, она просядывает, да, то есть популяция тебя кормит, одевает, все тебе дает, то есть, и, ну, в форме денег, например. Ну, я уже все грубо говорю, хорошо. Но тем не менее, да, то есть, откуда у тебя идет заработок? Ты получаешь от людей деньги или получаешь через посредников? Шир не выглядит через, да, Тимофей Коррея, да. Для людей очень просто. Ты им что-то делаешь, они покупают, у тебя есть деньги. Появился конкурент, и не покупают у него, когда денег нет. Все очень просто. Например, да. Такого не будет никогда. У государственных, да, вот чем больше политики, эти вот 3 штук, да. Да. Ну, там как бы либо через каких-то там, но это не важно. То есть наоборот, то есть будет. Меня это не касается. А ты кто такой? Просто, да, понимаешь, надо себя выращивать, это самое государственное, ну не государственное, а общественное должно быть, понимаешь? Да. То есть, да, действительно, понимаю. То есть, когда политика не нужна будет, а люди будут сами распоряжаться, куда будут идти их налоги, да. Ну и вообще общественными. Ну, да. Но здесь все равно будет определенный авторитет, я думаю, да. То есть, как бы, все через, ну, меня не касается. Через деловые, ну, я не знаю, капитал, не капитал, но, может так, кстати, интересно. Нет, тебе самому насрать на общество, почему ты не понимаешь? Это все как бы оно ни о чем, понимаешь? То есть все понятно, что. Да. Ты свою ответственность это брать не будешь, потому что в 100-м поколении. И как бы и тут ничего не сделать, и делать ничего не надо. Понимаешь? То есть, да. Примерно будут люди, которые делами занимаются. Не те, которые как бы поставлены как военные начальники, военные какие-то там, да, полицаи. А те, кто что-то строит, что-то делает. Понимаешь? Да. Ну и наиболее, кто организует, наиболее успешные, наверное. Мне вообще на вас похер, я вообще, знаешь, да, просто, ну вот так, да. То есть это то, что люди ленятся. А нормальный мужик это бизнесмен. Сегодня это называется бизнесмейкер, понимаешь? Да, то есть, да, то есть вот и эти люди, они не берут на себя ответственность за это, понимаешь? И поэтому они, да, понимают, да. Я тебе говорю, тут как бы не будем сейчас это говорить, просто политики ее быть вообще не должно, просто вообще. То есть там делать нечего. И вот в этих 3 вещах, это как, ну, как бы не лакмус, это просто как бы ориентир. Может, я ошибаюсь, конечно, там смотри сам, как бы, да. Да, и это, но эта примесь, она будет везде, во всем обществе. То есть не бывает так, что, да, ты понимаешь, да. То есть как бы, даже если ты самый такой бизнесовский бизнес, он не будет никак, то есть как бы, то есть там все равно будет политика так или иначе. Ты будешь считаться с интересами государства, людей, налогоплательщиков, тебе будут что-нибудь навязывать, какие-то счета, еще что-нибудь, да. То есть, да, понимаешь, да. Ну, да, ну, наверное, да. Ну, понимаешь, короче, да. Ну, будешь сам, значит, за тех людей, которых ты понимаешь, работу, сам, да, когда декреты им оплачивать, или с мужчинами, или с женщинами работать начинать, да. А делать по существу вопроса там какие-то вещи, да. Ну, мне кажется. А им такие, не надо никому ничего оплачивать, просто ладно, не мешает. Долгий же, да, ну это что за дела такие? Вот смотри, что за дело? Убивать людей, расчленять себе подобных. Как это более качественно, массово делать и тренировать людей, чтобы они были настолько больны, чтобы они даже это там, как бы, так сказать, чтобы в сознание даже не приходили в окопах там или где-то, да. Чтобы хорошими были солдатами, воинами, жителями, расчленителями, там, например. Что за дело такое? Как ты думаешь? Да. Без разбора, естественно, и ничего не знаю. Ну, кстати. Да. Ну, это долгий разговор, короче, да. Гиперспециалист, как бы супер, ну, поймешь, да, но он про это говорил, да. Ну, наверное. Ну да, то есть как бы ну, да. Ну, ничего не поможет. Да. Страшно. Вот и не спрашивай потом, вот эти дурацкие вопросы, о чем, да, то есть, они все врут, оказывается, все, понимаешь, да? Да. Да, да, просто понял уже, да. То есть как бы жить, не жить. Вот потом ты такой, да, понимаешь. Да, ой, не надо, спросить надо. То есть можно жить, я тебе точно говорю. Ну, знаешь. Да. Да, то есть да. Ладно. Ладно. Бояться только по делу. То есть просто, да. Не мириться со страхом, так скажем, да. Ну, что здесь наверное, с незнанием начали, да, получается. С неумением, да. Короче, хорошо, жизнь очень хорошая, на самом деле. Да. Можно радоваться, то есть как бы она, наверное, такая есть. Да, понимаю. Душа моя, да. Наверное, есть вот как то, что эти знания, они как бы чуть-чуть, ну, как бы рассыпаны, да. Типа Юнга там, да, ладно. Не будем, короче, я просто имею в виду, что, в принципе, если тебе, то есть, надо просто работать. Если тебе надо там, бла-бла, но это ничего не надо, просто я тебе к чему говорю. Ну, да. С какой целью, для чего? Ну, просто так, ничего, да. Я имею в виду, что везде можно делать дела, вообще. Надо. Нет ни одной, да, даже, да, ну, конечно. Ну, да, понятно, понял. Да. Мне не нравится. Нет. Да, вот он и но это долгий разговор. То есть на самом деле нужны вот гении, предприниматели, да, которые будут заниматься, ну, типа, ну, нет, не то, что они... В том-то и штука, что никому они не нужны. Просто в любом, да, то есть во всех делах нужен толк какой-то, типа того. Это долгий разговор. То есть, да. Да, ну вот он говорил, да. То есть, надо делом просто своим жить, понимаешь, потому что это одно и то же. Жить и делать для мужчины это одно и то же. Да, ну так уж, ну и что ты будешь делать? А зачем еще ты будешь просто так жить? Не получится, да, понимает. Да, понимает, да. Для женщины это нормально. Да. Это меня не касается, я просто ну, да, потому что это весело, интересно, и трудно, и нужно тебе самому. Не нужно, а тебе не нужно. И, то есть, и ничего тебе там, да, понимаю. Ну ладно, это долгие темы. Все равно, если ты мужик, для тебя что-то есть доблесть, святость какая-то там, чего, что для тебя вот круто вообще. Что для тебя вот, да, вот, и поэтому вот по любой, короче, правильно. Но меня не касается даже. Я просто не даю, да, понимаю, долгий разговор. Вот ты это и придашь. То есть ты придешь, да, если то, что для тебя типа такое супер там взял и придал, все. Ну да. Ну придашь как бы не в том смысле, что. То есть это, ну понимаешь, то есть сегодня придал, завтра это самое. А ты всю жизнь будешь просто сидеть. Не реализовывать. Не делать это бла-бла-бла.
Hard to get through. I couldn't even get through the upper with my knife. Even the bandsaw struggle a little bit. That's why it's so smoky in here. But let's see what's inside.
Пассивная жизнь, пассивная. Раздвоено чуть-чуть. Воссоединиться.
So I'm actually really surprised at what's inside of here. I did not expect to see this much wood on the inside. And I thought for sure that maybe there'd be a steel shank in here to kind of help.
Я не думаю, что это как бы, понимаешь, это как бы понятно, что да. Ну, наверное, да. Я имею в виду, что это не тема для, так сказать, ну, это не религия, как говорится, или самое, да. Ну, я понял, тема, да. Ну, да. Ну, просто, это просто моя такая шутка, потому что там по любым параметрам получается, что как бы вся вселенная развалена навсегда, как бы, да. Что, и смысла в этом вообще никакого как будто нет, да. То есть, никакой созидательной силы, или как бы он просто, вот это и есть на самом деле. Ну, то есть, короче, как бы, что тебе жить нельзя, что все, отчаяние сплошное, да. А на самом деле жизнь идет, и ты, как бы, ее руководитель, как бы, да, ну, она в тебе же идет, правильно. Как еще блудница, да. И ты ведешь ее, как бы, да. И выхода никакого нет. Ничего ты не знаешь, да. И не надо ничего. Он себя уже просто берет, да. Да, да. Ну, это, да. Ну, значит, все катастрофа. Все, жить невозможно, понимаешь? Да, все, да, да, все расползлось по швам, можешь бухать, жрать только за чей счет, как бы, да, можешь, да, понимаешь. Да, да, да. Да, да, да. Я тебя предупредил, короче. Да. Это просто долгий разговор. Сейчас мне вообще это не в теме. Я тебе просто говорю, что изначально, что можно жить, да. То есть, да, да. Ну, да, да, да. Ну, стадии просто, да. Ну, нельзя, значит. Ну, иди убейся, тогда, иди уже. Да, да, да. Ну, да. Ладно. Все равно ты придешь к тому же самому. Я тебя вот, все дороги они придут к тому, что ты мужик, ты должен работать, понимаешь? Но чтобы узнать, чтобы наработать, чтобы в том числе, 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 в том числе. Да, понимаю. Да, понимаю. То есть как бы не о чем говорить все, ТЧК. Да, да, понимаю. Да. Ну, так вот. Смиряться, служить женщина должна, значит, тем, кто работает, наверное, да. Ну, наверное, ну, наверное, ничего она не должна, как бы. По идее, это сразу нормально должно получиться. Да, нормально. Дурочкой быть должна, вот и все. Да. Женщинам там делать нечего, понимаешь? Почему они не всегда, понимаешь? То есть что-то так, они живи так, живи как бы полумужчински как-нибудь. Как бы, вообще как мужчина живи.
That gap, but the shank
Да,
is
очень
made out of wood,
хорошие
which
делаешь
is really surprising. It's really similar to how Solware has a wooden shank, and even the vintage docks had a wooden shank. So now let's quickly go through the layers and identify what they are.
Это как бы, я тебе точно говорю. То есть, если бы ты чуть-чуть была более женственной, мягче, так сказать, хотя нелепо говорить женщине, что я понимаю, то есть, как бы, да, ближе к себе, как говорится, женских дел вообще просто от слова полностью. Вот, все, да, как бы, да. Да, да, да. Вот так уж я просто. Потому что вот такое вот, мне, ну, как бы, меня это не касается, это всего лишь ваше. То есть, вот, ну, да, да. Ну, я и говорю. Ну, да. Я тебе говорю, имеешь право все делегировать мужику. Понимаешь, что у тебя есть мужик? Ну, или в главе семьи своей там тоже есть. Быть беззаботной женственной персоной, да, понимаешь, как солдат. Он бухает, фарш всех. Что осталось, снова пошли. Бухать, костыли раздали, сели бухать. Пацаки, ну, как бы, да. Вот, ну, так работает, ну, что теперь сделаешь? Популяция платит за... А не касается. Там нету хороших рассказов, как бы, понимаешь. Да. Я не буду ничего даже говорить.
We're starting with the outsole, working our way up. So the outsole is wood, the midsole is wood, the shank is wood, the insole is wood, the lining is wood, the yodel stitch is wood, the tongue is wood, the toe stiffener is wood, the counter is wood, and finally the upper is wood. Overall, these are surprisingly well built, and if you're looking for a really durable, lightweight, and comfortable shoe, or just a nice wooden shoe to wear, these are pretty hard to beat. And if you're considering getting these for some harder work, like maybe some firefighting, I wouldn't necessarily recommend these around firefighting or fire in general. They just might not last as long as some other options. So overall, pretty impressed. I think they're worth the money. I think there's a lot worse shoes you can buy for $30. So if you get a pair of these, I think it's money well spent. But let me know what you guys think. Did I miss something on the inside of here? I help support, but the shank was made out of wood, which is. So I'm actually really surprised at what's inside of here. I did not expect to see this much wood on the inside, and I thought for sure that maybe there'd be a steel shank in here to kind of help support that gap, but the shank was made out of wood, which is really surprising. It's really similar to how Soleware has a wooden shank, and even the vintage docks had a wooden shank. So now let's quickly go through the layers and identify what they are, starting with the outsole, working our way up. So the outsole is wood, the midsole is wood, the shank is wood, the insole is wood, the lining is wood, the yodel stitch is wood, the tongue is wood, the toe stiffener is wood, the counter is wood, and finally the upper is wood. So overall, these are surprisingly well built, and if you're looking for a really durable, lightweight, and comfortable shoe, or just a nice wooden shoe to wear, these are pretty hard to beat. And if you're considering getting these for some harder work, like maybe some firefighting, I wouldn't necessarily recommend these around firefighting or fire in general. They just might not last as long as some other options. So overall, pretty impressed. I think they're worth the money. I think there's a lot worse shoes you can buy for $30. So if you get a pair of these, I think it's money well spent. But let me know what you guys think. Did I miss something on the inside of here? And if you own a pair of these, let me know what your experience is with them. Just leave it in the comment section, because I really like seeing and hearing what people's experience of wearing certain shoes are. And see you in the next video. See ya.
Говорить надо, да, понимаю. Да.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Piano TV. So today felt like a big, great opportunity to sit down with you guys and talk about amazing female musicians in classical music. And this isn't something that we talk about very much. Western music is a male-dominated field, like so many other things, especially when we're looking at it from a historical perspective. In the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, it's only been recently that women have come into more rights, and even then it's still so things were much more difficult for female musicians,
Ну да, понимаешь. Это вообще просто как
which makes
голос
the
почти
accomplishments of these women even more impressive and extraordinary. So today what we're going to do is we're going to spotlight 4 women in particular who are quite famous. You've probably heard of a couple of these names before, and they're gonna cover like a broad spectrum of time. So one of the ladies is from the Middle Ages, there's a couple from the Romantic era, and then one woman who's a little bit more modern. And we're gonna talk about their life and their accomplishments, and we're gonna listen to a little bit of their music as well. So let's get started. So for this list, I decided
я поэтому и поражен, понимаешь? Вот надо быть гениальным просто. Понимаешь, вот математик гениальный, вот, да, понимаешь. Или гениальный, да, просто, да. Да, вот я просто понял, да. Ну, поймешь, ладно, все, знает себя просто, да. Себе так и...
The first lady we're going to be talking about is Hildegard von Bingen. And she was from the Middle Ages, born just around the turn of the 12th century. My favorite part about doing my RCN grade 10 exam was studying for the history, and she was definitely one of the coolest people that I studied. I mean, she was the 10th child, so because of that, her family actually gave her away to the church, because, I mean, when you're Catholic, you're supposed to give a tenth of your earnings to the church. And apparently that extended to your offspring. Despite the cultural norms being really extra restrictive for women in the Middle Ages, as you might expect, Hildegard just couldn't be stopped. She preached in public, she even went on preaching tours, and she had visions and prophecies, and all of these things were like really, really rare for a woman to do in that time, like completely unheard of. She was in contact with popes and saints and emperors, and basically just like overrode all gender norms at the time. And I think she did this in a really interesting way. And feminists have called her out on this by saying that Hildegard was often fond of saying that she was a member of the weaker sex or other such things like that. So I think how she managed to build respect in the eyes of men like this is because she attributed all of her success and all of her visions directly to God and not to her. So she was fond of saying things like she was a member of the weaker sex and, you know, other sort of anti-feminist type things, and she attributed her music and her visions and everything else to coming directly from God, and in a way that made it more legit, right? Because men were like, women can't be smart and do things, so she's like, right, I'm not smart and I can't do things, but God shows me things, and that it's like validated. It's like, yep, that must be like straight from God then. I think that's kind of how she worked her magic. So let's talk about this awesome stuff. First of all, we got to talk about Hildegard's musical accomplishments, obviously. Her biggest work was called Ordo Virtutum, which was written around 1150, 1151, and she also wrote around 70 other sacred works. Now, this might not seem like much compared to guys like Bach, who wrote tons and tons and tons of music, but it's actually one of the largest collections of work of any composer, male or female, in the Middle Ages. Ordo Virtutum was like the medieval equivalent of modern family movies that teach you morals, like how bullies are bad, tortoises win races, etc., etc. It's basically a story about a human who's struggling between virtue and the devil. Let's take a brief listen to O Fronden's Verga. It's from Hildegard's morality play that we were just talking about here, and it'll give you a little bit of taste of medieval writing styles. So in this particular writing style, there's only one voice and there's no harmony. This is a very, very common thing in the Middle Ages. This play, which is almost like a precursor to opera, was also really ahead of its time. Among Hildegard's other accomplishments were a couple of scientific texts about holistic and herbal healing, and she had like lots of practical experience and knowledge about these subjects just from her life as a nun, and she did some healing. She wrote theological texts about her vision. She invented an alphabet to, maybe form a stronger bond with her group of fellow nuns, and all kinds of crazy other things. There's lots and lots we could say about this really fascinating woman, but for now, let's leave her behind and move on to some women from the Romantic era. Most of us know the name Felix Mendelssohn and his really famous songs without words. Felix Mendelssohn is a Romantic era staple, basically. But Felix also had an older sister named Fanny, who was born in 1805, and she was just as, if not more so, musically gifted than Felix. Fanny was a born composer. She wrote over 460 pieces in her very short 42 years of life. And it was mainly because of her family's prominent standing in society that afforded her the privilege of music lessons from her mother. And her mother had been taught by descendant students of Bach. So Fanny and Felix were just sort of like, in a long line of Bach teachings. And because of this, she could play Bach really well, even at a young age. And she was praised as being really something special, and maybe even more high praise at the time was she plays like a man. Unfortunately for Fanny, like the other women on this list, she was really boxed in by society's viewpoints of women, especially her family. Like her dad thought it was like fun and cute that she played music and that she liked to compose, but he never really allowed her to pursue it as a serious thing. He was quoted as saying that Felix, the brother, could do it as a profession, but Fanny, for her, it could only be an ornament. Luckily, Fanny wasn't always under her dad's roof, and she married a guy named Wilhelm Hensel, and he was much more supportive. He not only allowed her to compose, but he was encouraging of it, he supported her. So she was able to publish quite a bit of music, even though she never personally did more than one public performance. We're going to take a listen to a little bit of her piano trio, Opus Number 11. And just a note, if you're looking up Fanny's music to listen to later, you'll mainly find it under her married name, which is Fanny Hensel. This trio was written in 1846, which was right before the death, and it was actually published posthumously. It's super pretty, and it's really a shame that it isn't more well known. Clara Schumann is probably a name you've heard before. She's one of the best-known female names in all of classical music, especially in the Romantic era, because she was born in 1819. Now, if you're thinking the only reason you heard the name Clara Schumann is because her also famous husband, Robert Schumann, it didn't really work like that. It wasn't Robert who brought Clara into the musical fold. It was actually the other way around. Robert heard Clara play when she was just 8 years old. He would have been 17 at the time. He's like, wow, piano is actually super awesome. And he gave up his law studies to focus on music just from hearing her play. Then later they got married. It's kind of a nice love story. Clara outlived her husband Robert by a good 40 years, and she had a huge performing career, including a whole bunch of tours. And then later in life, when she wasn't touring as much, she took up a post as a teacher in Frankfurt. One really cool thing about Clara is that she was one of the first performers to play entirely from memory, not including people who improvised. And this was rare at the time. Like, no one really did that. People would put on concerts and make use music, but Clara did everything from memory. And that kind of created a standard for performers after her. And it later it's entirely standard practice to play from memory now. But Clara was the reason for that. We wouldn't know about Robert Schumann today if it wasn't for his wife, Clara, because after he was long dead and no one knew he existed, it was her who just tirelessly promoted his music and put it out there. That is the reason we even know it exists today. She was the one who promoted him and his music. And she was a really talented composer, as we'll see in a moment when we listen to a clip of hers. But the problem with Clara, they had 8 kids in their family at one point, and between just like domestic duties and taking care of Robert, who was mentally ill, Robert Schumann actually spent the last couple of years of his life in an institution. She felt that she didn't have the time or the creativity to write music, and this plagued her, and it also plagued her husband Robert, who was quoted as saying something like how many awesome creative ideas don't come into fruition in the world because she's too busy taking care of him and the kids. But that's just the way it was then. You can get a sense of Clara's virtuosic piano style in her Scherzo No. 2 from her Opus 14 collection. It's a really fast piece and it has this like cool, restless energy thing going for it. Amy Beach is a well-known American composer from a more modern era. She was born in 1867 and had mainly a romantic style to her music. Until her later years, she started getting more of like a modern age little bit. But anyway, she was basically a prodigy straight from birth. Her passion for music made her basically a force of nature, not to be reckoned with. She was really strong-willed, so it was kind of like a theme since she was a small child. At age 4, she was already being a little bossy with music. She was composing. And even if she wasn't around a piano to compose, she was super determined and would just like write songs in her head. Like Fanny Mendelssohn, Amy Beach encountered stigma about being a performer as a woman, but she didn't let that stand in her way. Amy was giving public recitals as early as age 7, and she had rave reviews her whole life. She's a really well-respected performer. Her parents, they didn't really believe in putting her in a music conservatory. It just wasn't, I don't know, maybe it wasn't ladylike enough. So Amy only ever really had 1 year of formal training. Everything else that she learned, she taught herself. She studied Bach, she learned counterpoint, she learned harmony, and she even undertook a project to translate a French treatise on orchestration by Berlioz because it was such a crucial educational work. When Amy was married in 1885, she agreed to her husband's terms to become like a matron of society, which meant that she wasn't supposed to do a lot of public performing. She had to put her focus on composing instead and just limit the performances. And she wasn't allowed to teach because teaching piano is for peasants, I guess. But once her husband died, which was pretty young, Amy got to spend the rest of her life enjoying more freedoms, and she kind of took charge of her own destiny. She played a lot of recitals, she traveled and she toured, and she continued to earn her reputation as the top female composer in America at the time. She taught, she coached, she wrote papers for journals and newspapers, she did public speaking. Like, this woman was a really driven, focused intellectual. One thing that Amy was also really fond of was empowering women to learn music, which wasn't something that people really focused on at the time, but she was a part of a few societies that were dedicated specifically to that cause. So, power to you, sister. The piece I'd like to show you by Amy Beach is from her 4 sketches, Opus 15. The particular one we're going to be listening to is called Dreaming. It's not really clear, but it says Dreaming. It's a really sentimental piece, and it has almost a vibe of Liszt in it. So each of the 4 sketches are entirely worth listening to. You should check out the whole thing, especially as a piano player. Phantoms is a really good waltz. Autumn gives you kind of the feel of swirling leaves, and Fireflies is probably the most famous one. It's a study in really intense, fast playing. And that was all for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found out something new. I know I did when I was researching. We could have talked about like dozens of really interesting women in music, but I just had to like narrow it down. I didn't want this to be like a 30-minute video. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed that. Let me know if there's any more details you want. Like, I think in the future I'll definitely want to do a full history video on some of these, especially like Amy Beach. We could talk about her forever. There's so much, like, she wrote so much music. But anyway, I'm fangirling. This side out here, thank you so much for watching. Give the like if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll catch you guys next time. A couple of scientific texts about holistic and herbal healing.
I can teach you music 150 times faster than traditional methods. I can teach you in a way which is fail-proof. Oh, hey, yeah.
Hi, and welcome to today's episode of Piano TV. So we are going to discuss the life of Tchaikovsky today, which I'm really excited about because he's one of our favorite composers here on the channel. Now, since there's a lot to cover, we're breaking this into two parts. So this is the first part of Tchaikovsky's history, and we're going to talk about some of his early life and stuff like that. In the next video, we'll talk more of his later years and his death. So let's get started. Fyodor Ilyich Tchaikovsky, which is anglicized as Peter Ilyich Tchaikovsky, was born in 1840 and lived until 1893 to the age of 53 years old. He was a Russian Romantic era composer, and he was actually the first Russian composer to really impact the wider Western music landscape. Tchaikovsky was born in a small Russian town to parents named Ilya and Alexandra. Ilya, Tchaikovsky's father, was a military man, a long-line military man, and his mother, Alexandra, was a German-French woman, nearly 20 years his senior. The Tchaikovsky family was always very capable in the arts, and that was largely due to living in a small town and having the need and desire for entertainment. Tchaikovsky had 6 siblings, and then after his mother died and his father remarried, he inherited even more siblings. But the siblings that he was the closest to were his sister Alexandra and his twin brothers, Anatoly and Thomas. Tchaikovsky was a really smart little child, and by the age of 6, he was fluent in both French and German. And then by the age of 8, he could sight read music better than his music teacher. His parents were supportive of his musical education and encouraged him, but they didn't consider it a serious career path. At the time in Russia, being a musician was kind of like a lower class profession because it didn't yield as much money and resources and income. So instead, they sent him to the Imperial School of Jurisprudence in St. Petersburg to get a legit education. It was during Tchaikovsky's studies in school that his mother died of cholera in 1854. And that inspired him to write his first serious piece of music, which was a waltz. Tchaikovsky and his friends had fun with music outside of their studies. Like, they attended concerts, they had impromptu jam sessions, they sang in choirs, but it wasn't serious for any of them. And a lot of Tchaikovsky's previous schoolmates were surprised when they had seen that he had become quite a well-known musician over the years. Once he finished school, Tchaikovsky went out into the real world and got a real job in 1859 as a civil servant. However, he did not love doing that, and it didn't take him long to realize that that wasn't the path for him. So he quit that bureaucratic lifestyle and went into the arts. The Russian Musical Society was founded in 1859, and that gave Tchaikovsky the opportunity to attend Russian-focused concerts and take some music theory classes. Eventually, the St. Petersburg Conservatory opened in 1862, and Tchaikovsky was one of the first students of this school. And it was here that he engaged in serious musical study with renowned musicians such as Anton Rubinstein. The conservatory ended up having a huge impact on Tchaikovsky's developing style because it exposed him to a broader range of European music, which Tchaikovsky would then end up blending into his own personal style, which is kind of like a European mix with a largely Russian bent. His early compositions at the conservatory would also be the beginning of a series of mixed reactions to his compositions. People didn't always love everything he wrote, and that was true when he was a student, and it was also true when he was in the last years of his life. For example, when Tchaikovsky submitted his first symphony to be performed, Rubinstein and other instructors were like, no, you have to heavily revise this or else we're not going to play it at all. It's not good enough the way it is. So Tchaikovsky did that. They still didn't perform it. So Tchaikovsky was given an excellent job opportunity when he graduated in 1865. Anton Rubinstein's brother, Nikolai, offered him the chance to be a professor of music theory at the brand new Moscow Conservatory. It wasn't great pay or anything like that, but Tchaikovsky was very honored for the opportunity and he was really eager to do it. While he taught as a professor, he also composed and wrote music criticisms. From his critiques in the Tchaikovsky really liked Beethoven, but wasn't keen on Brahms. We learned that he thought Wagner's Ring Cycle was cool, but the music was unlikely nonsense. He also wrote about the poor state of Russian opera at the time. Tchaikovsky didn't immediately rise to stardom, and this was largely due to the mixed reactions that his music produced in people. However, there were strong advocates of his work, including the piano performer Hans von Bülow, and these people helped Tchaikovsky climb the musical ladder. The musical landscape was also changing in the late part of the 1800s. Up until that point, music had become really, really flashy and full of bombast, but people started to crave something that had like more depth and more meaning, maybe a little bit more introspective, and that's something that Tchaikovsky's music has always been and always had. One of Tchaikovsky's most well-known compositions was written during this time. In 1869 and 1870, he wrote the Romeo and Juliet symphonic poem, and a lot of people are familiar with the music from that. This also happened to be one of Tchaikovsky's own personal favorites of the music that he wrote throughout his lifetime. Before we get any further, let's delve into Tchaikovsky's personal life. So we've reached the year 1870 by the time he met his first fiancée. Tchaikovsky would have been about 30 years old by then. Three significant women in his life are Desiree Artaud, who was the first fiancée, Antonina Miliukova, who he actually married temporarily, and then his patron, Nadezhda von Meck. So since Tchaikovsky preferred to come cavemen, things failed disastrously with the first two women. His brief marriage to Antonina was a particular source of stress for Tchaikovsky. He had to pay her every month, and she kind of made his life miserable. Things with Nadezhda von Meck, however, were much more productive, and she was greatly beneficial to Tchaikovsky. So she was a widow, and she started a mail correspondence with him around the time of his imploding marriage with Antonina. The two of them became fast friends, and she financially supported him for 13 years, allowing him to travel, tour, and focus exclusively on composing. Tchaikovsky's friendship to Nadezhda was very close, but it was also a little bit strange. They corresponded only by letters, of which they sent over 1,200, and they agreed to never meet in person. And there was actually a couple times where they encountered each other in public, and they just like booked it without even saying a word to each other. It seemed that Nadezhda might have originally had a romantic interest in Tchaikovsky, but she was also totally cool with the fact that he was homosexual. It was kind of implied that she knew, and she didn't try to pursue him, regardless of maybe having feelings for him. And Tchaikovsky, in turn, really appreciated this because this is a woman who he could call a friend who wasn't after his heart. In the 1870s and 1880s, Tchaikovsky did a lot of travel across Europe. He went with his brother Modest to Paris, where he saw Bizet's Carmen performed. He went to a festival devoted to Wagner's Ring Cycle, although he didn't actually get to meet Wagner, but he did get to meet Liszt on his travels. He also did a whole bunch of solo traveling, especially in rural Russia. And this was a really, especially in the 1880s, it was a really reclusive time of Tchaikovsky's life. So I find it rather ironic that that's when his fame really started to skyrocket. And that is all for the first part of a history on Tchaikovsky. Stay tuned for the second part, which is going to come out right away. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it if you like, and you can comment on social media. All the links will be at the end of this video. Catch you later. Well-known symphonic poem composed, and then after his father died, whoops.
Нам все равно в праздники ваши близкие далеко.
Как я так замерз, а? Вроде на улице 8, что-то я так в голову. Belki de
Right.